Thousands of years ago, a civilization so powerful that to this day it is one of the most enigmatic and majestic civilizations in history, took dominion on Earth and also took dominion after death. In Egypt, death was a ritual, because it was believed that after death human beings continued a long way of life, where they would enjoy the best moments and valuable objects with which they were buried. The ancient Egyptian empire believed that life after death was written by the gods themselves. According to Egyptian writings, the myth of eternal life started from the union of heaven and earth. It is said that the god Gib, the god of the earth, and Nub, the goddess of the sky, were united, and as a product of their love they had 4 brave children: Set, Nephthys, Isis, and Osiris. It is said that over the years the children of the gods married each other, so Isis and Osiris were united in marriage, as well as their 2 remaining siblings. According to the story, Isis and Osiris ruled the empire and managed to position it as one of the most powerful in the world. Both ruled in the most prosperous era of civilization. It is said that one day, Osiris had sexual relations with his sister Nephthys, who was the wife of his brother Set. So Set killed Osiris by locking him in a sarcophagus that he had made to take revenge on him. Then Osiris' wife sought his body, after being dismembered by his brother Set. Isis was building part by part the body of the king, and took him back to his palace. However, the pain Isis was so great that she decided to give him the resurrection for Osiris to be with her again. So the goddess decides to give a great breath of life, and gives a bit of new life to Osiris, with the help of several secret rites. However, Osiris would die soon after. Time later, the god Ra would have sent the god Anubis to help mummify the body of Osiris, so that he could find his way to eternal life. So Anubis embalmed the entire body of the famous god and adorned it with the finest jewels, the finest fabrics, and protective amulets. Thus he was buried, and his great empire was over. Thus Osiris would become the first Egyptian mummy, and from there this practice was carried out for thousands of years in the great empire of ancient Egypt, since, with the resurrection of Osiris, a new life after death, eternal life, was guaranteed. In Egyptian mythology, it was said that death represented the beginning of eternal life and that to enter it the body after death had to remain intact. So the bodies of the main pharaohs, and their descendants, were mummified by the god Anubis. With this ritual, it was ensured that men would have more luck in reaching eternal life. For thousands of years the god Anubis was the first-hand embalmer of the bodies, and performed secret rituals that ensured the preservation of the Ba until the Dut. Later, it is said that this sacred task passed into the hands of the priests of Anubis. These priests were the ones who embalmed men and ensured the best way to eternal life. The priests of Anubis always had to wear a mask in the shape of a dog or jackal to resemble the guardian god of the kingdom of the dead when mummifying the bodies. During the first periods of the Egyptian civilization, not everyone had access to be embalmed, since the high cost of the priests made this practice inaccessible to many common men in the empire. As the years went by and the empire grew much larger, any person was embalmed for their resurrection. Likewise, these majestic mummies are said to have gone through a meticulous procedure involving dark rituals, as it was believed that the body had to be reanimated for eternal life, and to be the eternal protector of the imperial tombs in which they were buried. The priests of Anubis were such sinister and mysterious beings, that within the empire they were the most respected people, even by the great pharaohs themselves, since their cult was also destined to dark gods of the desert, to whom they offered their offerings and prayers for the ritual of reanimation of the mummies. According to the myth, the sacred ritual performed by Anubis and his most faithful priests made the inert body turned into a rigid mummy, to be directed and controlled by the darkest energies and spirits of the kingdom of the Egyptian gods. The secret rites, spells, and other gloomy secrets forced the spirits of the mummies to be tied to the temples or tombs where the gloomy ceremonies took place, rather than granting them eternal life in the afterlife. The priests of Anubis buried the mummies with the traditional funeral rites, and their prayers were directed to the protector god of the kingdom of the dead, Anubis. He was the eternal one in charge of transporting the souls to the underworld and receiving their judgment, and returning with more power the spirit of the mummy to its eternal tomb. The divine protector beings had only one objective, to protect the dead embalmed and dressed with the finest jewels, and to protect the most precious treasures and riches with which the pharaohs or high commanders of the Egyptian royalty were buried. That is why all the tombs were sealed and concealed inside a series of secret chambers, with several dangerous trapdoors, and most importantly powerful curses that protected the entire sacred temple. During the time of ancient Egypt, it was very famous the work of looting tombs, taking all the riches they could, but also carrying on their shoulders a great curse that destined them to death. The spells were written on the walls of the temples of the necropolis, and those who risked entering and plundering the tombs were men who did not believe in the sacred deities and much less in the divine punishments that would condemn them after committing such atrocious acts. Many of the men who decided to enter would not leave the colossal tombs, for it is said that the gods and dark spirits would battle them to the death to protect the fortune destined for the afterlife. The stories of the surviving looters were often heartbreaking, as it is said that the men worked for days to build an external tunnel that would allow entrance to the tomb from an unknown location. This hard work took long periods, even months, but the ungodly were full of malice and ambition that formed gigantic networks of looters. When approaching the tombs, the work was even heavier, for several workers died for no apparent reason from one moment to the next, and many others said that the energies became heavier and made them give up, against their will. The most greedy, avaricious, and ambitious men were those who continued on the road until they managed to penetrate the tombs and who cared little about putting their lives at risk before the evil deeds sent by the divine power of the gods. As soon as the men stepped on the sacred and bewitched tombs, they received several punishments. As they went deeper, they saw how the fire traps were lit, trapping several unwary, burning them in seconds without leaving ashes. Many tried to return, however. The path was confusing and led them to dead-end hatches or to torture rooms where their fate was a slow, bloody death. The more fortunate ones did not allow the spirits to penetrate their minds and continued the paths at a slow pace with great stealth, and managed to reach the gigantic rooms where the sarcophagi of entire families of kings remained. They approached stealthily and with fear in their hearts, for the return was not certain. While the men were touching the shining coffins, a slight rumbling could be heard in the necropolis. A rumbling from beyond the grave echoed in the walls of the great and sacred tombs. This was the chilling warning of the revival of the mummies, the revival of the spirits invoked and destined to the protection of the tombs until death. This roar was so overwhelming and intolerable that men forgot its purpose, and those who tried to open the giant sarcophagi were instantly slaughtered, for when they touched the sacred coffins, great sharp rocks fell from the top of the temples, dismembering the bodies, leaving the human arms at the feet of the sarcophagi. To human eyes, the author of such atrocious acts were sinister shadows that took control of the sepulchres. Such protective beings were sent by the same gloomy gods of the desert. The most avaricious and incredulous looters, against all odds, took what they could: the fine amulets of gold and silver, the sacred plates and statuettes made of gold and other precious stones, and then desperately tried to return. However, the dark temples began a stealthy and crude revenge on the dark spirits' monkeys. Thus, the embalmed bodies took power thanks to the magical sacred rituals that the priests consummated in the sepulchres, so they had already been invoked in advance to protect because they were ready to kill the impious and avaricious profaners. Thus, from the deep and funereal depths of the sepulchre, sinister beings arose, straight from the darkest of the Duat, the underworld. Among fine bandages soaked with magical potions, surrounded by powerful hanging amulets, the somber mummies awoke from their rest, to punish those who touched their riches. With the great power of the gods, the world of the dead appeared in the plundered tombs, taking power and form in the perfectly preserved corpses, and thus proceeded to torture the offenders. The mummies, as real living dead, as beings without pain and mercy, were practically impossible to defeat. They were effective and cruel, so men were beheaded, incinerated, and countless other tortures, with great ease and without a trace. The mummies, together with their most faithful servants, took revenge against the looters who indignantly profaned their tombs, who immediately repented and proclaimed clemency. However, for the protective entities there was no mercy. For many years the looters were intimidated by the stories of those who, if they managed to extract something valuable and sacred from the tombs, because they said that, if among the men who entered to loot the temples, there were survivors, These were condemned and controlled by the dark protective entities. In addition, there were those who were destined to be mentally tortured, with terrifying thoughts and voices until the end of their days, which unfortunately were not many. On the other hand, to all those who survived, an eternal curse pursued them, and many were forced to confess the terrible crime committed and to be punished until death, with really cruel and bloody punishments, accompanied by much pain and suffering. Thus, no one was exempt from the curse of even the slightest touching of the sacred tombs and riches of the highest kings and their families. Over the years, looters increased, especially in times of scarcity, which even made foreign people join the great sects of impious looters, who broke the divine laws, demonstrating their skepticism towards the divine gifts, challenging the powers of the secrets of the kingdom of the dead. The mummies keep great incomprehensible secrets, even until the first years in which several archaeologists found the said tombs received a little touch of death, after uncovering the sacred bandages of the mummies. Egyptian mummies are undoubtedly a historical marvel, and today they show us the great power and prestige that various pharaohs possessed on earth and after death.